Evening, everybody. Just a quick intro from me, and then we can crack on with the evening. Firstly, I'm Nick. I help run the green screen project with lots of my good friends from Greenpeace and Lee Hadaway, who's doing all the important technical stuff that no one sees, but it wouldn't happen without him, so cheers, mate. Tonight's screening of This Changes Everything is a film adaptation of Naomi Klein's fifth novel. Her previous works saw her become an international bestseller with the likes of No Logo, The Shock Doctrine, and Take. These tackled emotive topics such as globalization and the rise of disaster capitalism. Now, with This Changes Everything, Naomi offers her critique of how the neoliberal market economy is waging war with our ecosystem and challenging life on Earth as we know it. We're also here to, we also have Priska with us this evening. She's our special guest, and she's going to lead us through a discussion and a question and answer round at the end of the show. She's here from End Ecocide UK, and she's going to talk us through some of the great work they're doing, hoping to make ecocide illegal under international law, and would essentially see it become a crime against peace itself. Governments and businesses would then legally be bound to put the planet before profit, which sounds pretty awesome. Right, so we're just going to have a couple of quick video intros, which Lee is going to get rolling in a minute. And yes, that is film time. Cool, we're going to have a couple on End Ecocide, and then Naomi Klein's going to have a 1-minute talk on introducing the film. So I hope you enjoy This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate.
I recently met a corporate lawyer called Polly Higgins, and she said, "Let's eradicate ecocide." And I said, "Huh?" You know how there's an international criminal court that tries individuals for crimes against peace, right? Well, this court is in The Hague in the Netherlands, and their job is to bring to justice criminals who have committed international crimes, like for example genocide, which is the destruction in whole or in part of an ethnic, racial or religious group, or crimes against humanity, where one or more human beings have been systematically humiliated through murders, rape, torture and persecution, or war crimes when human rights have been violated during conflict, or even crimes of aggression, where one state violates the sovereignty and independence of another state through armed force. Well, imagine if the crime of ecocide, which occurs when the natural environment of a given territory is destroyed to such an extent that the survival of its inhabitants is threatened. Well, imagine if the crime of ecocide were to become illegal under international law. This is all very interesting, but what difference is this going to make? Well, imagine if heads of state and corporations were legally bound to put the well-being of people before profit. This would resolve many of our problems with pollution or the destruction of ecosystems and climate change. Yeah, that's great, but honestly, what do you think I can do about it? First of all, we aim to collect 1 million signatures from European citizens so that laws against ecocide can be discussed in the EU Parliament. The next step is to bring this law to the United Nations and have ecocide recognized as an international crime against peace. Then companies and individuals will be held responsible for destroying livelihoods of people and other living creatures. So tell your friends, share this video, use social networks and shout it off the top of a mountain if you like. End ecocide. But before you do any of this, please take 2 minutes to sign this petition to end ecocide in Europe, once and for all.
The majority of the human race does not see global warming as a serious threat. Celebrate! Climate legislation is dead.
We, in the global north, with less than 20% of the population, are responsible for over 70% of global emissions.
We are drilling all over the place.
On the other side of the world, those people who are the most affected by climate change, most affected by environmental injustice, have the least responsibility for creating this crisis in the first place.
The amount of fossil fuel that we're combusting year on year is growing. We're going in completely the wrong direction.
I've spent 6 years wandering through the wreckage caused by the carbon in the air and the economic system that put it there.
That old paradigm will be forced to change, either by the environment around us or by us.
We are all part of this movement!
When you see communities who are thrown into the front line, and you see the incredible transformation, they become stronger, they stand up.
So here's the big question. What if global warming isn't only a crisis? What if it's the best chance we're ever going to get to build a better world? Change or be changed?
There are limits. Let's celebrate the limits because we can reinvent a different future.
And I'd like to welcome Priska to the stage now. She's going to talk us through her work with End Ecocide as part of evidence which could hopefully lead some of that transition. Priska.
All right, well, thank you very much for inviting me. And I think after such a powerful movie, it's going to be very hard to add anything, but I just wanted to introduce you to a concept which we believe is really a solution to many of these struggles that we have seen here in the film. So I'll try to keep it to 10 minutes maximum so that we have some time for questions and answers afterwards, and then of course we can hang out with some more drinks there. So what I would like to present is basically a very fundamental and easy idea, which is to recognize environmental destruction as a crime. And that crime is called ecocide. And can I just have a show of hands in the room who has heard about ecocide before? Okay, excellent. So a few of you have, but a few haven't. So I hope I can explain a little bit. So basically ecocide, it comes from the Greek word oikos, which means home, and it comes from Latin kaidere, which means killing. So it literally translates to killing our home. And the interesting thing is that this concept has been around for quite a long time, actually. So it was first introduced in the 1950s in the context of Agent Orange and the Vietnam War. So that was the first time that something was called ecocide. It was actually the scientist who invented the chemicals, which were then used to create Agent Orange, which he didn't intend them to be used for. He called the Vietnam War the biggest ecocide. And then since then, the concept has been around, and interestingly, in international law, when first the International Criminal Court was founded, that you've seen in the introduction in the very beginning, which is responsible for 4 crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crime of aggression. When that court was founded, ecocide was actually meant to be included as a 5th crime. And it was included for about 20 years in all the discussions throughout the 70s, the 80s, until the early 90s. And then suddenly, it disappeared from the draft in 1995. That was due to the opposition to a few countries. Does anybody want to guess who were among the opposing countries? USA, very good. Who else? UK, yeah. The other 2 were France and the Netherlands. So, due to their opposition, it was dropped from the draft Rome Statute. And the only thing that remained, interestingly, is a war crime of environmental destruction. So now we are in a situation where, for example, chemical weapons are illegal, they constitute a war crime, but using exactly the same chemicals as pesticide is not illegal, because it's not a crime during peace. So the reason why I'm explaining all of this is because it shows that actually the concept has been around for a while. It's been elaborated quite a lot, has been discussed in all relevant UN committees. So the legal structure is there and it can work. And it was rediscovered. But basically, what is very clear as well is that, as this film also illustrates, the governments are not going to act unless people demand it. And we believe that ecocide can be a very powerful tool for exactly the kind of communities that we have been seeing, exactly the groups in Montana, the indigenous groups, the people that fight against the tar sands, because all of these examples constitute ecocide. So if it was recognized as a crime, there would be an additional tool, a legal tool that these communities could use. But yeah, as I said, the governments are not going to act on their own, but we need to put pressure on the governments to act. So this is the reason why we started the movement in 2012, actually, already. So we started running a European Citizens Initiative. Can I just have a show of hands who knows the concept of the ECI, European Citizens Initiative? Ah, you see, not so many. So basically, it's, I hope you guys vote to stay in the European Union, because otherwise it's the tool you're going to lose. But it's basically a kind of a petition at the European level, but it's stronger than a petition because it can demand a reaction from the European Commission. So basically, if 1 million citizens sign a European Citizens Initiative, the European Commission is obliged to consider the draft legal proposal and for that law. So we basically ran a citizens initiative to get a European ecocide law. We only got 185,000 signatures, not a million, so unfortunately hasn't happened yet. But, you know, we still continue. We still believe that we need to build a movement. So I'm just going to talk quickly about what the key features of the law are, because obviously I realize probably not many of you are lawyers, and I'm not a lawyer myself either. But when I first heard about it, it just seemed such a powerful tool, because at the end of the day, law determines the framework we live in. Law is the rules we give ourselves as a society in how we want to work and how we want to organize ourselves. So if we manage to change the law, we can really achieve the kind of paradigm shift that Naomi was talking about, the kind of shift that we really need to make a quick transition very profoundly. So there's a number of key features. So the first of it is that both corporations and also individuals in positions of what is called in law superior responsibility can be held accountable. So that's a concept that comes from international law. So it means that the person that orders a certain project or the person that decides that a certain project goes ahead is responsible, rather than the individuals executing the project. So obviously the reason why that was introduced was, for example, in the context of genocide, where you would want, you know, the army decision makers to be responsible, or the politicians, and not the soldiers. Even though, of course, the individual still carries his or her own responsibility, but the bigger responsibility lies with the person who's in charge. The second concept, which is really important, is something called strict liability. So that means that you do not have to prove the intent. So that's really important, because at the end of the day, I think as became also very clear here, is that corporations or policymakers that decide that a certain project goes ahead, that decide on a certain coal plant or the tar sands, their primary goal is not to destroy the earth. Their primary goal is most of the time to make profit or to generate jobs or some other goal, and destroying the earth is part of the process. So basically the reason why we need a strict liability is because it means that even if their goal was not to destroy the earth, they could still be liable for destroying it. The third point, which is really important, is that it looks at entire ecosystems. Because one criticism we get a lot is, oh, but there's so much environmental law out there, there's so much protection out there, like, isn't it enough? No, it's not. Because the difference is that the law of ecocide looks at the entire ecosystem. So, for example, you have a lot of regulation about the certain amount of substance that can be used, you have thresholds, you have these kind of things, but what nobody looks at, like, how all of them work together. So, for example, if you have a lake, you know, certain level of pollution from that side, certain level of pollution from the other side, then maybe an accident happens. So if you take the ecocide law, you have to assess the linkages between all these different things that can happen and what it does to the ecosystem. And if the result is that the ecosystem is damaged, it has to be illegal. So at the core of it is also a preventive idea, and that's actually something which we already have in EU law, the precautionary principle, so already it should be done, but usually it's not. So basically, yeah, any action needs to be assessed for the potential consequences rather than the probability that an accident happens. The other two important thing is that it protects the rights of future generations and the rights of indigenous people, for example, as the film was very clear also in promoting. And ultimately, and most importantly, it also recognizes this intrinsic value of nature. Nature as something that is worth protecting because of itself, rather than a machine to be used. So, as I said, the film makes it very clear that we need this systemic shift, and we need a whole new value system, and we need a vision and a new story. And we believe that ending ecocide can constitute an element of that, because it does recognize this intrinsic value of nature, but also because it influences a new principle, which is do no harm, which has to come before making profits. And very, very importantly as well, in particular, in context of justice and environmentalism of the poor, as the lady from India says, it's about the accountability of decision makers. So it ensures that those who make the decisions are accountable, and it also ensures that corporations are accountable, because so far, the worst thing that can happen is that there's a fine which is imposed, okay, they pay it, but anyways, they make more profit, so they make up for it. But with the crime of ecocide, we make individuals in the corporation responsible, criminally liable. So it means they could be subject to prosecution. And that's really important, because that creates that accountability, which I think is lacking in our system at the moment. And that could also obviously lead to reducing inequality, and it will create a level playing field. So, at the core of it is to put the people and nature at the center. And we have a very paradoxical situation at the moment, because we have a situation where corporations have rights, but the earth doesn't have rights. We have a situation where corporations can sue governments for environmental policies under the kind of trade treaties that we have. If you have a chance, read her book. It doesn't come out so much in the film, but there are striking parallels in how trade law has developed and how environmental law has or hasn't developed. And partially it's because there's this contradiction which cannot be resolved. So unless this fundamental flaw in our current system is fixed, there's really little hope that we can address climate change as quickly as we need to. But I personally am very convinced, and we as Ecocide are very convinced, that law has to be part of the solution, because the law is the framework that we act in. So if we manage to change that framework, if we manage to change the law, that will have impact on all elements of society. So I would say let's rewrite that story, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thanks very much for that overview, Priska. Sounds like a wicked movement, and holding those responsible for ecocide to account, I'm sure is something we can all get on board with. We've just got time for a couple of questions, if anyone would like to ask one. Priska.
So the website is www.endecocide.org or endecocide.eu. And there's also leaflets out there, and I think all of you will hopefully get one when you leave. But yeah, endecocide.org. Yes, of course. So we totally believe that that's a very, very, very important part of changing the situation, that, individuals make the right choices and individuals change things. But there's also a limit to how much you can do as an individual, because sometimes, for example, I was looking the other day into savings accounts, cash ISAs, which would guarantee that they're not investing in fossil fuels and all of these things. And sometimes it's just really hard to find an alternative and to find a choice. So, which is why we believe that in addition to each individual making the right choices, we also need to change the structure. We also need to change the structure. And that's where the law of ecocide prevention can be so, so, so powerful, because it will make it so much easier for every individual to make the right choices, because it will force the government, well, no, let's not say force. It will create a level playing field, because it will put some limits, it will put some conditions which have to be met. And then, once these conditions are met, what we will see is that the right choices will become more affordable and will become easier for people. So then that will facilitate that individual choice making as well. Yeah, so maybe I should also start by explaining a little bit about our organization, because actually it's a totally volunteer-run, that's why we call it movement. There's not a lot of structure and there's no funding and nobody is full-time. And when we started it, we made a very, very, very conscious choice not to become another NGO, because what we thought is, what we were hoping for is that we can get other organizations campaigning on the same issue. Because at the end of the day, what we want to do is provide a solution, provide information. For example, we can have discussion groups, trainings, we can spread the concept. Like, we're not trying to own the idea of ecocide. I think the more people that talk about it, the better. And if people want to develop the concept further, very welcome. So we work mainly on that. Of course, what we also try to do is to support the kind of groups that have their local struggles. So support groups that have their local fights against ecocide. And of course, we were involved, for example, in Romania with Russia Montana, we were involved in Greece with the Hagiki. So we are involved here in the fracking movement. So it's connecting the dots between these. For example, we are also supporting the Stop TTIP coalition against the big trade deal. So we kind of support other causes where they link, but ultimately the main purpose, let's say, is to spread the concept of ecocide and also to advance the lobbying strategy and also to build that movement and just build support for it and raise awareness, because ultimately, we are not under no illusion that our group alone is going to make that happen. What we need is a lot of groups from different backgrounds, indigenous communities, labor unions, environmental NGOs, all of them need to unite to make the change happen. The mine in Greece was actually stopped in January, so there was a success. And I think Canada is to be seen. I mean, Trudeau is definitely much more, progressive and less convinced of the tar sands than his predecessor. But I think Canada, the other problem there is because it's such a massive project and it's already quite far advanced. So even if they were to pull out, it just, it will need a lot of pressure from civil society to happen. Yeah, so actually the problem is it was only a one-year collection period, so it finished. So we had 185,000. We had a discussion of our cause in the European Parliament, which was very good, and we are following up with the relevant committees. But that's where it kind of ended the European initiative. But that's why we then decided to continue collecting signatures. So you can still sign on the website. You can still support the petition. You can also join the mailing list and the newsletter and all of that. But basically now we kind of changed the direction of the petition. So now the petition is going to go to Ban Ki-moon, the UN General Secretary General, because the way it works for the amendment of the Rome Statute to happen is that we'll have to find a head of state who proposes it, and then it will be sent from him to the UN Secretary General, and then the UN Secretary General kind of has to disseminate it with the other countries, and then we need to find 82 countries that support it. So basically, it's a big challenge, but it's totally feasible. So it's possible, that's one very clear sign what you can do to support. I mean, if somebody wants to get more involved, like we always need help with all kind of things on social media, but also organizing local groups, for example. I don't think we have anybody here, but it's always possible to set up a local group to organize small activities or film screenings or lobbying MPs and just spreading the concept. So there's a lot of things that can be done. Yeah, no, so it's any time when there's an ecosystem which is being destroyed. So for example, it's also open coal mining, it's deforestation of the Amazon, it's plastic pollution of the oceans, and also agriculture. And actually we are involved in this tribunal against Monsanto. I don't know whether you've heard about the concept. So basically, there's going to be Monsanto is going to be put on a mock trial in the autumn, in October in The Hague, and there's going to be judges that will evaluate whether Monsanto, especially its Roundup product, whether that constitutes 6 different crimes or 6 different violations of rights. So it's going to look into the human right to a healthy environment, to the right to food, the right to water. It's going to look whether it's a war crime, because Monsanto was also involved in Agent Orange. I think a crime against future generations, and then the 6th one is actually going to be ecocide. So we are working with a group of experts who have produced a whole amendment for the Rome Statute, for that international treaty, a very legal amendment, how it could work. So they're going to use that text in order to evaluate whether Monsanto, in that case, has committed ecocide and whether it could be prosecuted if it was actually recognized as law. So, yeah. Okay, I think I can't see any other hands. So, back to you.
Firstly, thanks very much, Priska, for coming down and giving us an overview. Guys, that draws to a close tonight's festivities. So thank you very much for joining. It's been awesome to have so many pro-environmental people in the same place at once and for a really good discussion of ideas. So hopefully we can do it again soon. You are now free.